even though I say yes, there are sides of me that say no, so I don't know exactly how I'm going to answer, to be honest.
I don't think I can give you a straightforward answer. I really have to think about that.
감사합니다. That's my menu. I do think that you have to sacrifice for the greater good of humanity and society.
So sometimes maybe we can sacrifice one for many, but it depends on the context.
I don't think minorities or individuals should be sacrificed for the greater good.
Would I sacrifice myself? I hope so. I'm supposed to. I'm called to. But I don't know.
Welcome, shooters. Hope you had a good week. Yes.
Hello.
We're going to begin, as always, with a roundtable discussion in which everyone can exchange their views freely, and the show will end once we come to an agreement and a unified statement. But before we get to the question, let me begin by giving you a hypothetical situation. Imagine that there is a trolley barreling down a railway track. Yes, you may have heard this one before. The trolley is headed straight for 5 people who are tied down to the tracks, certain to bring them death. You notice a lever nearby. If you pull the lever, the trolley will switch to another track where you see one person is tied to the tracks. So the question is, do you do nothing and let the 5 people die, or do you pull the lever and let the one person die? And this brings us to the question for today. Shooters asks, would you sacrifice one for many? You may have heard this before, but what is your answer? Let's hear.
This sounds like a bad day in San Francisco.
Yeah.
You know,
That's an American expression.
well, we have
They
a
have
lot
train
of
car. They have
trolleys. We have
Okay,
trolleys in San Francisco. I guess now I have to give my opinion
Yes.
since I started. But you know, in this scenario, which is it's so simplistic, it's just numbers, right? I would pull the lever because it just turns into math. I think it might be different when you see names and faces, right? But if you're just counting lives saved, I might be inclined to pull that lever.
Anyone else?
I would not pull the lever. Number one, because you're actually actively taking a part in someone's death, whereas if you just allow it to happen, well, you're not necessarily responsible as much.
You're
I mean,
actively
this
standing
is
by,
situational.
allowing
This
5
is
people to
situational
die?
ethics, though. I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to change.
Exactly.
I
Those
think,
five people, I agree more on your point.
anyone, when you're in that situation.
Those
or
5
faced with it.
people will disagree with you, though.
But that one person,
Yeah.
after you save them, they're going to say to you, why didn't you save the other 5? Because I'm only one as opposed to
Kevin
them
said
5,
it's a
which is
matter
the
of
opposite
numbers.
too as well.
What would you do if there are 5 people and you have chance to save 3 persons? Would you calculate 5 bigger than 3?
Oh dear.
Or different, just 2 people is not so much important? My position, it's very hypothetical
Right.
situation. So I would rather not do anything because it's a matter of not numbers, it's a matter of action.
Let nature take its course the way it's
Yes.
supposed to go.
Yes.
Come on, the others, you have to take a stand.
Well, I'm surprised at the response. Because the trolley problem is set up in a way which most people would say, okay, we'd pull the lever, right? We'd pull the lever. But the second part of the trolley problem, it changes it slightly, okay? So instead of pulling a lever, okay, you're in the same situation, there's 5 people on the track, the train's going to kill them, the train's going to take them out, but there's a fat person next to you.
Standing on like a bridge, right?
Yeah. And if you push that person onto the track, they'll die, but you'll save the 5 other people. So you're not pulling a lever, okay, and choosing the direction of the train. You're pushing somebody onto the track, okay? And so for most people,
You
generally...
wouldn't do that. I mean, that takes quite a lot of thinking as well, you know? Don't have time for that.
I think it's a hypothetical
I say,
situation.
no time to think. How
illustrate the
many?
point.
What is the difference in numbers?
There's
think
a
it's
lot
a
more
tough
involvement
question.
is
Tough question.
Yeah, it's
in
an
that
actively
question.
pushing someone.
Yeah.
What if it's just
I mean-
pulling the lever?
Well, it's basically, I think, so actively participating in killing someone or allowing other people to kill someone while watching or allowing other people to die while watching is the same for me, right? I don't think there is a difference. But I think, so this whole thing of sacrificing few for the greater good is like an old notion. Society also has been doing that since forever, humanity, right? Also even religions, right, have been doing that. Abrahamic religion, yes. And even cultures, ancient cultures. I tend to be more protective of individuals and minorities. I don't know, maybe because I'm a Palestinian, and so it's just like there's a background to it. But I always tend to be protective of minorities and individuals. So I don't think that a collective should allow a situation where a minority or where an individual should be sacrificed
So
for
you
the
think we
greater.
should sacrifice the larger population in order to
unless-
favor the minorities?
Unless there's a consent.
I've seen that before anyway.
If that's even possible to achieve. If there's a consent, then it changes things.
Consent from the
person who's...
one person?
Yeah.
Take me?
Some people want to sacrifice themselves. Some people
Consent
do
is
it, you
definitely
know?
But I think we have to distinguish between self-sacrifice, if people want to
Right.
sacrifice
Yeah.
their life, and sacrifice of somebody else's life for, I don't know, common good.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the trolley problem is a hypothetical problem and it's very famous, but let's bring it a little bit more back to reality. In the US, there was recently a case where a nurse returned from West Africa where she had been treating Ebola patients. And when she came back to the US, she was required to be in quarantine for, I believe, 20 days or so, almost 3 weeks. She refused to do so. She refused to do so.
I think
She had tested negative twice, but it was a matter of just in case that you have to be in quarantine, but she said, no, I won't do it.
Was she tested negative twice?
Negative twice.
She tested negative 12, but she was still
Wow.
required to be under
Wow.
quarantine.
But we've seen, I think what spurred that case was that another doctor came back from West Africa, a part of West Africa, where he was treating Ebola, into New York City, and he tested positive. And he had gone bowling, and he had taken the subway. And of course, Ebola transmits in certain ways, right? It doesn't just automatically spread. But to think about an infectious disease like that in New York City, that's a Hollywood movie right there. So I think when you expose yourself to those kinds of dangers, or rather, when you expose your neighbors to those dangers, you have to give up some personal liberty.
So
course,
you,
yeah,
thi-
but when
you
you
think the
tested
nurse
negative
shouldn't
twice.
have done that, refuse quarantine?
Yeah.
Personal rights?
Well, I mean, that might be tricky
Well-
because I think a quarantine schedule should have been set up beforehand, and she should have had the choice to go.
The
and,
politician here. Yeah.
The diplomats?
Yeah, that's...
well, they quarantined the astronauts when they came back from space because they didn't know what was going right. They knew that, and they consented. So.
And I think this nurse was not rather rational person, because on the one hand she made decision to sacrifice her life and to go to Africa to fight Ebola and probably to face lethal danger. But on the other hand, it was such a minor sacrifice just to stay
in
in the
quarantine.
medical facility for several days.
Yeah, I think in cases where there's potential harms for like society, and the sacrifice that you're required to make is, not like taking away your life, maybe a little bit of like freedom, infringement upon freedoms for a specific amount of time, and it's restricted. I mean, maybe one
The
can
thing
consider.
is I think that she acknowledged that she might be in a danger zone. But it was after the second diagnosis where they gave her an okay, yet still they kept her in quarantine.
Yeah.
I think that was probably the breaking factor that made her,
Yeah.
come on,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm okay, let me
it's
go.
I
It just
don't
felt
think
like it
my
was a
family-
procedure.
I've been in
like-
Africa for a
yeah.
couple months. I haven't seen my family. I haven't eaten American food or just whatever the reasons that she had to get on with her
Actually,
life.
that's
about the
good that she
risk,
hasn't
though?
eaten American food. That's
What about-
healthy.
What
Yeah, I
if, what
should
if
be
it had broken out? I mean, can you imagine the spread of the disease in a
Yeah,
major city?
terrible.
I don't think you can reasonably expect anyone to make many sacrifices for society at the end of the day. I don't think you can realistically think that people should or have to make some, any kind of sacrifice for society. I think the bar is actually very low in terms of the sacrifices that you could expect someone to make.
I think it's very high. And I think we actually expect a lot, but in real life, not a lot happen. Only in Hollywood movies.
Yeah, I would agree. Realistically speaking, when push comes to shove, when we're faced with making a decision,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
will you actually go through with it and be
Especially
the heroic,
the new
brave person to...
generation.
Never mind
Like
new
my
generation.
grandfather would say that
Sacrifice.
the old generation was far more courageous than
I
the
think
new
if you're being realistic, what would you do? Okay, I think I'm more likely to push 5 people in front of the train to save myself than I would be to pull the lever to make it go for
That's very honest, though.
Yeah, it
That
takes a
is
lot of
really
honesty to say that.
It's instinctive,
Like,
right?
absolutely,
it's a
that's it.
survival
We're
instinct.
instinctive,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
I think this idea of
Probably
the greater
just
good
freeze
out
and
there,
die. Probably.
is-
I wouldn't be able
is
to do
not-
anything. But, oh my
the
god!
greater good, I think, doesn't really apply, okay? I think the greater good is an idea, a concept that's been used by people who are in power to
Agreed.
inflict what they want on people who are disenfranchised, who are not in power. So forget that, okay? If I'm the person who's getting inflicted upon, then okay, the greater good can just go out the window, okay? Scratch the surface of anyone, we're all red in tooth and claw, right?
And
It's
usually the
Darwin
ones
out
that
there.
are required to make those sacrifices are the
Yes.
marginalized ones
Exactly.
and the weaker. So,
Exactly, yeah.
Well, hold on, Barry. If I
Exactly.
asked you for a Metro card to go home on the bus because
Yeah.
I lost my wallet, that would be, and say I never saw you again, right?
Yeah.
Say I was going someplace far, far away. You
Yeah.
would probably make that sacrifice.
Yeah,
right?
sure,
It's-
sure.
a small enough
sure.
sacrifice, or let's say you get some pleasure actually from sacrificing. So
okay.
if it's a life or death, I mean that's the extreme, right?
Yeah.
Where's that line? Because I think people get pleasure from sacrificing sometimes.
yeah, some people do that. Actually,
Sacrificing
religious
time,
people,
yeah.
some people,
Well, not the entirety.
sacrifice for
Your
their
time.
religion, for their beliefs,
the
for
cause,
ideology, for
defense.
democracy, right? I mean,
I understand what
Humanity
Kevin's
does
saying.
that.
These days, when you read scientific journals or you hear news about space exploration, if you were to be on a mission to Mars, possibly, would you do that? Because you'd go down in history as being the first person maybe to have a manned mission to Mars. But the flip side is you're never going to see your family again. You're never going to be back on Earth and things like that. But I understand what Kevin is saying is that that's kind of a good feeling that you're going to be remembered, that maybe your name is going to be on schools and on streets and things like that.
That doesn't mean it's necessarily for the greater good. It's more for the greater you, right?
for your ego.
Now we
It's
are
a giant
Potentially.
step for humanity. If you're, pushing the boundaries of space
Of science.
exploration, yes.
Maybe you're
Sacrifice
probably
for
doing it
science.
because you really want to go to space rather than future.
So
I
now we are-
think if you go knowing that there is a possibility that you won't be coming back, then it is considered
Personal
sacrifice.
sacrifice. But shooters, I want to bring the conversation or the topic of debate a little closer to home. I mean, we've talked about war, but let's talk about instances where we have had to and maybe sacrifice our personal freedom for the greater good. For instance, I don't know if anyone here is a smoker, but if you're a smoker, you'll have noticed that many regulations are now being placed that you may believe are infringing upon your rights. Now, you weren't allowed to smoke indoors, now you're moved outdoors. Even outdoors, you're moved to certain parts only. I don't know if that would fit in this argument, sacrificing one for many, but one could argue that. Another instance or example could be when governments or city governments encourage you to leave your car maybe one day of the week to lessen traffic, again, for the greater good. I don't know. Have you had any instances
I
of that?
have a friend who's a smoker, and one of the most interesting things I saw with her is that we were all having a meal, right? And after we had the meal, she really wanted her cigarette. And she, we were outside, we were relaxing. She got up and walked to kind of a far end of the outdoor restaurant area, downwind from us, and lit up her cigarette. just so that she wouldn't inconvenience it. You know, she went to all this way, and I thought about it. It's like, wow, I've never had a smoking friend do that before. They just, you know, blow it all in the air. And I thought, you know, I bet she gets some pleasure out of this actually, because she could show us kind of how classy she was by thinking about others.
She must have been classy, really
The way she did it was so considerate, I guess. You know, it's something I've never experienced from other smokers before.
I know. You hung out with people stop
really
being,
extremely rude
people need to
in your
stop
life.
being paranoid.
I lived in New York. I lived in New York City. I mean,
because that's just common courtesy, I would think. No?
Now, I think with smoking is different because basically when you're smoking, you are actively harming other people.
Yes.
So it's not a matter of sacrifice. So I
If
don't
people
think we
choose to
can
not
call it
smoke,
sacrifice.
you shouldn't impose on them. But I still think that there should be areas where smokers should be able to smoke. And for example, in France now, you can't smoke anywhere indoors. And I think that's actually...
Same in Korea. Yeah,
Well, in
basically
Korea
now.
you can if you have a proper license.
Ah, okay.
But in France, you can't smoke anywhere indoors, and I think there should be some clubs or some bars that are smokers. And if you're not a smoker and you want to go there, then it's your choice.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, actually. I was a smoker
should
for
impose it on
10
us.
years, okay? And I can remember when the smoking ban came in Britain, I was scandalized. It was outrageous.
Yeah, but
okay?
outdoor areas
They
became
actually,
awesome.
The door, in Ireland, with the horizontal, vertical rain, depending on the time
Okay,
of day,
yeah, that's
standing in the
pretty
doorway, no. But it just seemed like such a transgression of what the institution of the British pub was. You can't go and sit in a bar and
Yes.
drink a pint and smoke a couple of tabs. Come on, it's ridiculous. If you don't like being around people who are smoking in a bar, then get out. Go somewhere else, okay? Who the heck are you
non-smokers.
to tell me I can't smoke a cigarette in a good British pub, okay? I mean, it's just... I was genuinely scandalized at the time, and I felt like the smoking ban was following me because I moved to Ireland after that. And when I got to Ireland, it wasn't in effect yet, but a couple months after I got there, it came in.
it's just like the smell, it
Hugely
follows you
influential.
around.
And now you're in Korea.
Yeah, and now you had to stay.
yes.
Exactly.
Wow.
But by then
Speaking
you had
about
already stopped smoking.
that's true, yeah.
inconveniences
Yeah.
in Korea, and speaking about sacrifice of your own conveniences for the sake of common good, one of my experience is this trash recycling in Korea. You know, my country, Russia, is huge. So we don't have problem of trash and recycling. All my life, I would just throw away all together. And it was first time I came in Korea, and I had to.
I think the problem is about space here.
Yeah, so
Just
every
about
morning,
not burning everything in the air.
when I have to solve this trash problem, I keep telling myself, look, Korea is so beautiful, it's so small. You have to think about its nature and people. Please be careful with all these trashes, put in different boxes.
And that
And
takes a
think
lot of
about
time.
common.
It takes a lot of time to do that every day or every week.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
I think these are really simple cases, though, when we talk about if that's actual sacrifice one for many. I think the harder questions, which Seung-young had posed at the beginning, like the trolley situation, I think when there's some type of moral obligation, I know morality can be subjective, but when we are faced with those decisions that directly affect us and can be a little bit more serious than not smoking in front of people or recycling so that our country looks better, that the decision, most people I would think would agree that it's okay, that we can do it. It's just normal,
That
right?
we can
Duty.
what? Sacrifice.
That we can sacrifice because it's easy or it's a little bit more convenient.
Depending on what you're sacrificing. Back home, people sacrifice their lives for freedom, right?
Okay, but that's what I'm
values,
saying.
yeah.
I
So
totally agree.
it's not easy,
that's,
right?
That's
It's never
completely
easy.
different than me not smoking in front of you and then like, sacrificing yourself for your family. My goodness.
So I don't think there's a clear-cut answer in this
Sometimes we
debate.
need
actually.
to define what the greater good is. or
Exactly.
What's
plus,
better for
plus,
the majority.
And
as
you need
opposed
to know what's the greater good.
but also how to like
Smaller
incentivize it, right? Because the government does that to some extent. We say we have taxes at a progressive rate or something because we think it's for the better good. But I think of America and the car problem that we have, right? You can choose to buy a fuel inefficient SUV because you like it. And it's contributing to global warming. It's contributing to pollution. For the greater good, we should buy small, fuel-efficient, four-cylinder cars. But nobody does that, right? So, I tell you, if we had a law forcing us to do that,
Everyone would be up in arms.
Literally up in arms, right? So how
In
you
the
know?
US, yes.
Yeah. How do we encourage? Well, maybe in France.
It's
too.
unfortunate to say that.
So how do we encourage that? Like through government laws, through public education? I mean, what's the...
Do you think people are becoming more individualistic these days? I mean,
Of
we
course. I
think
talked
so.
about this with the younger generation. They only think of themselves.
Well,
I don't think it's a bad thing, though. I mean,
I think people have lost faith in their institutions.
I agree.
Okay? I think,
agree.
and certainly the younger generation seems to have lost faith in those old institutions which theoretically used to provide for us, whether it's the decline of religion or the declining voting rate in Britain. I just don't think people believe in the responsibility that institutions have, whether it's government, to responsibly look after you. And as such, I don't think you can expect anybody to make any kind of large sacrifice for their society.
So does that trickle down to the personal, the individual level, where I have reduced faith in my government or institution, and therefore I'm less inclined to think of the greater good, even for people around me, for my little community? Does that trickle down and affect them
I think
as
that's
well?
right, yeah.
You know, at this point, I have to ask you guys a question. I'm not sure which way any of you are leaning, actually. So let me ask the question. Shooters ask, would you sacrifice one for many? It's time to take a stance. Would you sacrifice one for many? Show of hands.
Still.
Yes.
Okay,
course.
even Jana. Okay. Travis, Nora, and Barry, you do not believe in sacrificing one for
right.
many. All right, well, it's time to head to their respective armories and to mesh your arguments out. The yes side will go to my right and the no side to the left.
You know, Frodo, like, he's gonna take the ring into the mountain and die.
Yeah, we need to be heroes, right?
Yeah, we actually want to help people.
Public
Judy.
responsibility
Judy.
also is impossible without sacrifice.
To sacrifice one for many, I don't know, it's a beautiful expression of the human spirit. I don't know.
We're just being realistic, right?
Pragmatic,
so.
okay?
In real life, no one is willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater good.
Sometimes I can see where they would,
Yeah.
but
Like small,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
all make small
Of course,
sacrifices all the
small
time.
scale, yeah.
Yeah.
Argue that it's basically unfair to ask people to sacrifice themselves or like give up some of their
I
freedom.
totally agree.
they can argue the same point though. Because if you really care about
Still.
people and you
Yeah.
value society.
Am I supposed to die then? Because I care about people, but I also care about myself.
What
so where's the
type of
balance?
society asks the
Yeah.
citizens to sacrifice
Exactly.
themselves? Okay?
The shooters, are you armed and ready? Yes? All right. Okay, so from now on, each team will try to convince the other over to their side of the argument. Each side will begin 100% convinced of their own opinion. But every time the opposing team says something persuasive or even reasonable, you'll press on the minus switch. But once again, once you're convinced by someone on your side, you'll press the plus switch. And these changes of opinion will only be able to be seen by the viewers, of course, and myself. And we'll reach bullseye when either team has won or we've reached 50-50. Let's begin with some opening arguments from the yes team.
Yes. So, well, us is kind of straightforward. The sacrifice of one for many has led to history's greatest moments, right?
Of course.
So we need to sing national anthems. We'll do that later. So we would
Let's hear these
sacrifice one
moments,
for
then.
many when the cause is greater and the heroes are willing to actually sacrifice themselves.
And I'd like to quickly mention, before we go into further detail, that we also think there's a personal element of sacrifice that's very important, that we see when we look at relationships as transactional, getting something back, putting something in, getting something back, versus based on promises, committing to do something and not knowing. And we've seen, for instance, the work of Martin Luther King, somebody who took that value and changed an entire generation, an entire country, sacrificing ultimately his life, one for many. So that sums up our position.
Yeah, he didn't choose to
Any
sacrifice himself,
arguments
did he?
there? Now,
Yeah.
the no team.
Well, he put himself in a risky situation.
He knew that
but
he was going to
wasn't
be
actually
shot.
forced to make a decision, one or the other.
Well, at that time,
Am I going to sacrifice
he
myself
knew.
right now for the greater
But
good?
eventually, he knew he was going to be shot.
Eventually.
He knew
But
the
those
risks.
are semantics.
He
He knew
gave
the risks.
Well, not exactly. You know, he gave instructions to his children: when you hear the shots, get down. And that's a famous story because at that time with the KKK, the death threats coming in, you know, en masse, he knew actually that he was going to die.
This is interesting that you're bringing actually Martin Luther King as a symbol of sacrifice for the greater good, because basically slavery started as a sacrifice for the greater good. That's how slavery started, right?
It's not the greater good, though.
We think
It's
it's
the
exactly how
greatest.
it was
in the
historically
context
justified.
so how do you define what's the greater good, and who defines
good.
what's
The
the
greater
greater
good.
good?
It's not
Is
the
it
greater
good for
bad.
It's not for the
everyone,
plantation
or is it
owners.
good for only specific group of
We're,
people?
we're talking about humanity here.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, well, hold on. We need
Yeah.
to make
Very
sure we actually
subjective.
understand what's
Yeah.
meant by the greater good. So greater good, historically, when that expression is used, okay, as it was for slavery and as it was for all sorts of abhorrent things that have happened in history, what it means is there's a powerful group of people who are deciding for the people who aren't powerful what constitutes good. So that's a key element and that's a key problem, and that's what we have to address.
And that's
our
what he
major
overturned by
stumbling
sacrificing
block.
himself.
Yes. Don't make us
Okay, I
look
think
bad.
He undid that power structure.
So
He
what
did-
is
he
your
hasn't
argument?
really
Does it
undone
rest on the greater
completely.
good or the
I think-
definition of greater good?
Right, I think we'll agree on, I mean, on certain points with the no team, right? But of course, we agree to a certain extent. We think that we need to differentiate between small-scale sacrifices versus large-scale sacrifices. When it comes to small-scale sacrifices, which like I don't want to, I'm smoking and stuff like these, so I'm okay not smoking near people because that's fine. But when it comes to large-scale sacrifices, such as giving up your basic human rights, right? Giving up your life, giving up your freedom, giving up your, I don't know, lands or whatever, we don't think that is fair to ask certain group of people to sacrifice, because we think that the way that sacrifice has been used throughout history, it targeted the disenfranchised and the underprivileged people. Specifically, when they wanted to sacrifice, they used to sacrifice women, right? When, I don't know, Abraham, the prophet, wanted to sacrifice, he wanted to sacrifice his son. In Egypt, they used to sacrifice women and throw them in the Nile for the greater good. So first, we need to establish what is the greater good. Who gets to decide what the greater good is? Secondly, we need to know that it's unfair to ask other people to sacrifice for the greater good. If I think that the greater good is so important that I need to get someone to sacrifice, then why shouldn't it be me?
No, but we don't think, we would never ask someone to sacrifice. We actually think that everyone would think like us and would be like, yeah, I'm happy to sacrifice because we would sacrifice for the greater good, so we expect everyone to want to sacrifice.
Yes, consent is an important issue. We need
Of
to
course,
establish
we
consent.
think consent is really, really
Yeah.
important.
Yes,
But that isn't historically what the greater good
Exactly.
is, and that's never what it has been.
Well, but these issues talking about the disenfranchised, the minorities,
We just
women,
showed loads of
I mean,
examples of
That's
people
exactly what
sacrificing.
civil rights was in the 1960s, and
But
many
greater-
people
People were
sacrificed
fighting for
so
that.
much their jobs, their
Exactly.
lives, their bodies,
They were
their
willing
health.
to do
But they were
And this
within a
was something that-
framework that was created by powerful people, which put them in a position
Exactly.
where they were having to make a decision
Yes.
to sacrifice themselves for.
And they
for
did.
something
Basically.
else,
And
they
they
did.
did, and
Isn't
we
it
should
amazing that they-
celebrate
that they did
that
I don't think
martyrdom.
they did it out of
The-
choice.
Absolutely, we should celebrate it, and we do, because it represents one of the best elements of human history, which is that we can change.
Are you denying that it brought about change, the
we can
sacrifice of
change
these
these
people?
problems.
Yeah, but
All right,
he's
I'm
discussing
not
a different
denying
type
that
of
it brought about
sacrifice.
change,
Activism,
okay.
right, is also a part. Can be sacrifice,
Yes.
right?
Martin
Because
Luther
you're-
King
it's
sacrificed
voluntary,
his
right?
life.
So we
Yeah,
talk about
but
personal
his life.
responsibility
I don't
for
think if
destiny
you
of
ask
the
his
world.
family, I don't think his family would have been happy about this sacrifice. It's
Really?
again, it's a personal thing. Of course. I mean, I don't want my kids to be martyrs. I don't want to be a martyr. I don't
Yeah,
think the
but that
mothers
was-
of
he doesn't
martyrs
want
are
his kids to
happy
be
about
martyrs.
the fact that.
That was his choice to make, and it was a beautiful
No,
and selfless choice.
His choice to make was not to die. The choice that he wanted to make was to change and to challenge the status quo and bring
And to do that,
equality
he knew
and
he would
create a
have to die.
better
He
reality.
knew that there was
Not
a
really.
risk, but he
no.
didn't know that he
No, I don't
had
think.
to
Yeah.
die.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
I don't
the
think he wanted
distinguishing
to
factor
die.
is because
Yeah,
if
but
you
that's a
have to die for your
sacrifice, yeah.
beliefs, but there's the potential for dying for your beliefs, they're
Yeah, that's
two
a
different
sacrifice.
things.
This is a little bit semantic. I want
That's
to
a sacrifice
imagine
anyway.
we're in the 1960s in Alabama,
You're
and there's
sacrificing
a
your security.
KKK convention outside, and these men do not like you, how you look, where you're from. They have guns, and they have historical prerogative to hang you from a tree. Martin Luther King went up against that. He knew he was going to die. He knew he was going to die.
Okay, let me tell you something.
I
I
don't
lived
think
that
so.
thing, right? So basically, my context is that we have to sacrifice every day on a daily basis. I don't think Palestinians would want to die. I don't think this is a choice that they make consciously. And I don't think anyone wants to be a martyr. I don't think martyrdom, I think it's glorified because by the end of the day, those people who die didn't really want to die, right? But to twist
but
it in
you
a
didn't.
point that it's like,
We're not
I mean,
explicitly addressing
yeah.
sacrificing yourself, okay?
Right.
The question is, can you decide for somebody else that they have to sacrifice themselves for another group?
Yeah.
No.
That's what the question, that's what we're addressing here, right? That's what the,
Well, the question is-
No,
Because
because we're
one for many-
believing in an
Sacrifice one for
ideal
many,
where
not
people want to sacrifice themselves.
I think that's one scenario. I think there's another scenario where the
Right.
person decides for themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I
It's
think
not
there are
just
two scenarios.
deciding for one or the other. It could be your own personal choice or it could be for someone else.
Because if you're part of our crew that like to sacrifice themselves,
Yeah,
then
yeah,
everyone,
yeah.
then if you tell someone, they would do it.
Yeah,
Can
so
I ask
come on
you
over.
a question?
But
So are you
isn't
willing
our
to
question
sacrifice
specifically, can
your
you
life?
choose for someone else?
He
Are you
said he
willing to
would.
sacrifice your life?
Yes.
For what cause? For what
I
cause?
don't have a
For a
cause right
worthy
now, but if I had a really good one,
Let me
D-
find
for-
one first
for
and then
DJs and
Well,
clubbers everywhere.
Yes,
Which would
yes.
you give yourself?
for the love of music.
Are you willing to sacrifice your freedom? I don't think it's a choice that you make because you know what? I woke up this day and all of a sudden I feel like I want to sacrifice my life. No.
Yeah, but if these
You're-
people didn't exist, if 100% of people would not sacrifice themselves, then nothing would have happened in history, and it would just be
I agree.
horrible, right?
Struggle of
No,
of
I
power.
agree.
Just in
Struggle
On
of
that
power.
point, I agree because we do need to challenge the
course.
status quo when it's bad. And I think
Yes.
activism is partially a sacrifice,
Exactly.
right? But then there's a limit. I think society needs to come and tell those people, no, we don't want you to die.
We had the old people in Japan that volunteered to in Fukushima, right?
Oh.
I
So
guess
the
that-
nuclear
Yes.
disaster, right? And then
They volunteered,
people
right?
had to go in
It's perfectly
to
fine.
help clean up. They needed actual people, right? And as we understand, these gentlemen,
They did. They
knowing
volunteered. Yes.
that they were going to have
That's
radiation
great
poison and
story.
die, they went in to sacrifice
for the
themselves.
greater good.
That was voluntary.
Yeah, that's good.
We would never. I don't think you understand our stance. We would not force someone to die for the greater good.
What about this case? I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it. It's a quite old case back in the 19th century. So it's 1884, and there was a yacht named the Mignonette, which is not French, but obviously it's an English
It doesn't mean
yacht.
anything in
But it was shipwrecked, and 4 people managed to survive on a dinghy. But after several days, no food, no water, it became obvious that they were going to starve to death. So I think it was the captain, 2 shipmates, and then 1 cabin boy. And the cabin boy made the fatal mistake of having some salt water. He drank some salt water and it made him delirious. But the captain decided that in this state, all 4 would not be able to survive. So he came up with this plan that 1 should die so that the others could feed on that person's blood and body to survive. The cabin boy was served up as dinner, to put it crudely. They figured that he was the weakest, less likely to survive, and so this boy was sacrificed. And the 3 eventually were rescued. And they were tried, first sentenced to death, but later acquitted because even the boys' parents, or they said they recognized the extreme situation, that the captain and the 2 shipmates were doing what they had to do, basically.
Yeah, I saw
And
that.
so they were acquitted after just 6 months. They only served 6 months.
Yeah, I read this story, but I feel like it should be either someone voluntarily says, "Okay, I am the weakest link here. I will."
Realistically speaking, who's going to be the one that says, okay, when they're faced with death, yes.
No, but I mean,
I'm
he
gonna
was
die for
delirious,
you.
so he could obviously not say that. But if I had 1 limb cut off by the accident, I'd probably say, "Okay, please do you use me as."
We'll keep
And
that
it's-
in mind. We'll keep that in mind.
I know.
Thank you, Jan.
No problem.
No, so but in that situation, I'm curious, with the no team, would you have just rather that all 4 took their chances equally? It's either they all 4
They have nothing to eat
take
on
their
the
chance,
island, right?
or
On the
Are they
dinghy.
on an
was their
island?
decision? No, they were
On
on
the
a
ship?
dinghy, like a
A
rescue
boat.
boat. Yes.
Why can't they fish?
They
I mean,
couldn't-
Fishing
I-
poles,
they
let's
couldn't
say.
find. Yeah.
I don't know.
Fish in the
My
ocean.
initial reaction would be like, let's try something else, right? Let's try.
Wait, but try what?
Apparently,
they
I don't
tried.
know.
Apparently,
they
in the
tried.
process, they did manage to catch a
eat each other?
tortoise or a turtle, and they ate that, and it sustained them for a while. But they were shipwrecked for, I believe, about 4 weeks or so, more than 20 days. So, you know, they weren't doing very well with the fishing.
I don't
it
think
wasn't
we
enough.
can sacrifice anything of comparable moral importance.
So everyone should just die, right?
I didn't say everyone should die, but who's going to be the person to make that decision? I
That's
don't
why
think
I was
that's
saying
it,
short
yeah.
straw.
Short.
The
straw.
drawing of lots, survival cannibalism. Apparently, yes, the drawing of lots is
Yes.
I
often
think this
used
is a
way.
very specific case, but
Yes.
I think it's so when we are, as humans, right, caught in a situation which is like inhumane, do we stick to our human code or do we just act instinctively and start eating each other? So that's a question which is like, it's worth thinking about. But I do think that by the end of the day, I haven't been there on that ship, so I can't really judge what happened. I just regret that it happens. I mean, I just regret that it's.
The ship story is interesting because it's close to one of these logical puzzles, which is very abstract, right? You've got X number of people, something happened, what do you do? These scenarios are so unlikely and so rare, right?
Yeah,
But something that's actually much more likely is, for instance, the earthquake that happened in Nepal, right? Now, you've got a vast population, a large area, fixed number of resources. If you're the director of the emergency response, you would have to make decisions of who you're going to send the resources to, which is essentially who's going to live and who's going to die. And we thought, what if there's a scenario in which there are people on a mountain which requires more resources, more time, more energy to reach, versus more people who are in the valley, right? If you were in that position, wouldn't you make that choice to, well, sacrifice the people on the mountain in order to help the people in the valley who you're more assured to reach, and more people will live? But isn't that one for many, right?
Yeah, but this is a different criteria, This is people who are more in need for that help, right? So it's just not it's not like a matter of number.
How can you say which one is in more need?
Well, people are going to die, right? We're choosing who's not going to die. And so in effect, we're choosing who is going to die as well in this scenario.
Well, maybe we can
maybe
use this as an
great evil.
example. Let's nuclear power plants. Many recognize that it's the cheapest, cleanest form of energy for many people, but nobody wants to have a nuclear power plant in their backyard, right? So the residents of places where they propose to build these will protest it. They'll demand monetary compensation, and should they have to sacrifice their homes and their livelihoods for this nuclear power plant, which will potentially serve millions and millions more? Should they sacrifice for the greater
no.
good?
No.
I think they should have the choice, but I don't think they should have to. And if they think,
Should get compensation, I guess. But are they
They can move. They can get
They can move,
compensation.
they can get
and move
compensation,
to another
right?
What if they
place.
don't want to move?
Yeah.
If they don't want to move.
Yes, they don't want to move. They love their home.
But you see, without sacrifice, we cannot
Press that button.
get
Press that button.
any achievements. Like there is a problem with reconstruction of Seoul. Most of the cities consisted of private old houses, and to build apartments, modern apartments, they have to destroy, to demolish old buildings of old people. So not all
It depends.
owners, yes, they agree with
depends
compensation.
if the building of the nuclear plant is a need, or is it just a financial activity? Is
If
it
it's
just-
needed or if it's
Is it-
just to create.
I mean, when the government seizes property from people in order to build something for the public good, they compensate them.
They do.
There's really no question. I'm not sure if we can say that's a choice in the matter. They're compensated at a market value. I think the things we've looked at are more, if you have a choice of sacrificing yourself, one for many,
Would it or not?
is that good? And I think we've seen over and over that the pinnacle of human achievement is represented in these decisions, where people have made that decision to sacrifice themselves.
Maybe this will help. Let's take a look at what ordinary people on the street think about this issue, shall we?
그 다수의 사람이 존재해야 사회가 연속적으로 이어나가는데 소수는 다수를 위해서 희생할 수 있어요.
저 때문에 다른 사람한테도 피해가 있으니까
굳이 공동체가 중요하지 않다고 생각합니다. 그냥 나 살기도 바쁜 현대 세대고
상황에 따라서는 그렇게 하는 것도 옳다고 생각하거든요.
제가 만약에 죽음으로써 여러 명이 살 수 있다면 전 희생할 것 같아요.
전염을 시키면 안 되지. 격리해야지. 아무리 나라도 해야지.
소수분들이 동의하는 정도의 심각함이면 괜찮을 것 같아요.
So from the interviews, it seemed that most Koreans seem to take it as a case-by-case basis, and quite a few mentioned the issue of consent. If it's voluntary, then it's okay, sacrificing one for many. And I know that you kind of brought that up before, Barry. Yeah.
Yes.
Consent.
Well, I think that's the key issue is consent, right? It's where the consent lies. So if you, the question of who gets to decide who's making the sacrifice now, if you're sacrificing yourself and full awareness of your own actions, then we'd say superficially it looks like that's fine, that's okay. But lots of times that consent has been manufactured for you by someone else, okay, by a more powerful group, by a more powerful organization. So let's take an example of the troops who go to fight in wars, okay? So I know in America there's been lots written about the fact that there's a fighting class. Okay, so the young people who go off to fight in wars, for Americans, they aren't the children of the rich and powerful, okay? They're the children from disenfranchised or more impoverished or more working class backgrounds, okay? So ostensibly, okay, on the surface, they have choice. They can consent to sacrifice themselves for the greater American good. However, do they really have a choice?
Yeah.
The greater good has been defined for them. So I don't think they really have I don't think we could say that they
Some
have.
of these people are actually very happy to serve their country and do something good for, that's not, they're not fully in control of it, right? And we've seen terrible wars that have been initiated and practiced by the US. But in terms of those soldiers, I think there's an amazing goodwill that they have. I mean, war is not a good thing, right? We should never celebrate war in and of itself. But I think some of them, I don't think we can deny all of their agency, right? We can't say that they don't have a choice.
We can't deny all of their agency, but we can't remove the fact that it's by and large people from more impoverished backgrounds who just don't have the same opportunities as people from different backgrounds.
Yes,
okay?
it's even more valid now also, but it's just the wars that we're fighting these days is a lot less direct than they used to be. Like in France, they were there, you had to we had to just not die. So of course people were fighting and people were doing the resistance, you call it the resistance movement. These people sacrificed themselves for the greater good. Of course, if you're talking about putting little kids that are coming from Texas that never went out of America on the forefront of battle, of course that's wrong, of course.
I agree with Calvin. Talking about the soldiers and their choice to sacrifice their life for their country. We should decide for ourselves. We are born just for happiness, a pleasure, or we're born for something more important things. We want to live for our children, for the future of our children, and we should decide for ourselves. Should we enjoy the economic prosperity, and should enjoy our children economic prosperity and democracy? Everything is coming with its price. So.
I think if a society requires an individual or a specific group of people to sacrifice their lives so that the bigger organization or institution can still exist, I don't think it's worthy of their sacrifice.
In a way, it's not really sacrifice, right? If you're forced to do something, then you've been coerced, and that's actually not sacrifice.
That's why I'm talking about those soldiers, right? Because
but the soldiers aren't murdered. They have the option to go and serve, and when they die, we don't say that we've murdered them.
It's portrayed in a very heroic and romantic way, right? You're a soldier, you're a patriot, you're protecting your country, you're doing a good thing. We think this is wrong, and it's not true, because when they're sent to wherever they're sent, they don't do good things. There's nothing romantic about being a soldier, and there's nothing heroic.
Talking about war might be we're going down a different tangent, but
and different wars and different.
I would say it applies to all wars, but I think I regret that people sometimes have that situation where they're forced into going somewhere else, carrying a weapon, kill or be killed. I don't think that's what sacrifice should be.
I think both teams have kind of a different view of personal sacrifice here. This team seems to take a much broader and expansive view, whereas this is a little bit more limited. But we're not going to go anywhere once we continue on this. So I think I would like to give each team a chance to make sort of a final argument or a final statement on each of your respective stances and try to convince the other side.
It seems like we have a
Narrow
point of
it
agreement
down
on
if you need
consent.
to.
Can we say that
agree on
consensual sacrifice
Before
is a
we
wonderful
go
thing?
any further, okay, if we're talking about this idea of the greater good, let's just put a nail in the coffin of this idea of the greater good, okay? The greater good fundamentally implies that there's another group of people who had no consent, who've been abused by a group of people who had the power to make that decision.
Well, that's kind of a stretch. I mean, are you saying that good doesn't exist? That good doesn't exist outside of
I'm
power
saying
abuse?
that
But
how
nothing is
the greater
entirely
good
good
as
or
a
entirely
concept
bad.
has been used.
So the
That
greater
is what
good
greater
can
good means.
make mistakes.
Okay,
The
that
term
is
has
what
been
it means.
abused, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? I mean, the term has been abused over history time and time again.
No,
it
what-
doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
No, but the concept,
But where
what the
does it
concept
exist?
means, okay, is that
Some
you...
things are better than others.
No, no, no.
To me,
no,
you don't.
right.
You're not responsible for
Well,
environment.
let's hear out Barry. You're trying to
Okay.
define the greater good.
Right, so
Let's
the
hear him out first.
concept means that you are allowed to make a decision for another group of people. You're allowed to take their autonomy, their own decision to, their own right to make decisions about their own welfare to improve the group that you belong to. That's what the concept of the greater good is. That's what it means.
It's not Martin
That's what
Luther
it
King made that
does.
choice for himself, though. It wasn't.
Well, no,
he
wait a
didn't make
minute.
it
No,
for somebody else.
he had
choose to
his
die.
own autonomy to choose he wanted to do that. That isn't the greater good. The greater good is that there's a group of people who make a decision for another group of people. That's what greater good is. That's what that
Is it not for
concept
everyone?
is.
I think that's your definition.
What about the
I don't,
big group?
I'm not sure I agree
How
to
do you
that.
come to that definition, Barry?
That is what,
that's
if you want to
your
go back
definition.
to, if you want to go back to Jeremy Bentham, or that is what the history of the greater good
So
is.
civil
That's
rights,
what
for blacks in America, for
Only
women,
profited
for
them.
minorities, that's not a greater good. That's not an achievement of a greater good.
Please answer us.
That's
A
not
question for you. Has it been achieved?
It's much better than it
Yes.
was in the 1960s.
No, come on, it's better.
Has it been
It has
achieved?
to be better, right?
Then what we're trying to say that basically the greater good is decided by the stronger power or by the stronger party who set what's good for everyone else.
That's a tenuous argument. I can't see that actually.
What if? So you want?
What might be
So
good-
you want
Let's
the
take an
sw-
example,
the,
right?
The
I'll give you
parity
an
to happen
example.
straight away.
I'll give you an example
wait a
of what we
minute,
mean. What might be the greater good for a person that is living in the U.S. It might not be the same greater good for a person that is living in Iraq or
Okay, what is the
Pakistan
greater
or
good? If you
Afghanistan.
listen to, I mean, it's really cliche, but I have a dream. That's it. That's the greater
No,
good
but wait
that
a
you
minute,
wanted
wait a
to
minute.
achieve.
I
He
agree.
And that's
didn't
where
get to
it didn't.
impose his dream, okay? So he didn't get to enact his version of the greater good, okay? Other people, their concept of the greater good was slavery, and they had the power to enact it. That was what the greater
That
good
was
was.
not the greater good for them.
Look,
No,
That
for
was
the
just
people who
how
were
to make the
greater
most
good
money
has not
possible.
been achieved yet.
It was a
Shooters, we've reached bullseye. It seemed impossible, but neither team has won.
Yes.
Each side has come down to 50-50.
Okay.
So, of course,
good.
now begins the difficult task of trying to agree on one unified statement that could represent all of your views. Now, the sticking point, of course,
Let's work together.
the
Let's
sticking
do
point, I think, was the definition of a greater good. And I think what we did agree to disagree on was the definition. Everyone has maybe a different definition of the greater good. So why don't we begin with that in the statement? For a greater good, maybe we can put
call
that
it a greater
as
good
a
instead of
foundation
the
for
greater
a
good.
greater good.
I mean, if it exists, right? So,
If it exists, okay.
assuming it exists.
We confirm greater good, and we insist on our initial statement that for a greater good, we can accept the sacrifice of one for many.
Is that okay with you
How do you
guys?
feel?
I think
But it has
No,
to
we need to add
focus on
something,
that the result can't be anything of a comparable moral importance, that it doesn't infringe on your personal rights.
Okay.
We also mentioned consent as well.
I think consent is the key.
Consent is
Yeah,
the
we need
issue.
to have consent.
Consent.
Not forced,
So-
not coerced,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
decided
Yeah.
by some group in power,
Government.
Yes,
some
yeah.
hegemonic.
No corporations telling you what
So
to
how would
do.
you like to amend that? So for a greater good,
Only if consent is established.
the sacrifice of one for many can be accepted only if consent is established.
Exactly.
It's a good sentence.
We all
Works.
agree?
Yes.
Yes.
We agree.
Yes.
All right. Another difficult question and an even more difficult answer, but we managed to reach a single statement. Another good job, shooters. All right, see you next week.
See you. Thank you. Oh, you're very convincing. You're very knowledgeable.